You know how everyone hated the Man of Steel movie because Superman, possibly one of the most beloved superheroes in all of fiction, is turned into a violent killer? Well, I suspect that Zack Snyder and David Goyer looked at the negative backlash of that movie and thought, hey, what if we ruined two beloved superhero icons? But unfortunately, turning Batman into a guy who premeditates murder for about 3/4 of the movie is only one of the many faults of this film. So even though Man of Steel wasn't a great film, it was a pretty easy fix, for me anyway. Just a few glaring problems that I felt like were easily patched, and providing those fixes still leaves you with a semblance of a plot that more or less resembles the movie that we got, but if I may be so bold, a little bit better. But Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice is going to prove to be much more difficult to fix, because when you remove one problem, there's still a bunch of other problems that still need to be addressed. In fact, the whole movie is problems hastily stitched together. It's got inconsistent and horrible characters, a dizzying plot that still doesn't make sense years after this movie came out, and one of the most downer tones of any superhero movie I've ever seen. Any one of these could sink a movie by itself, but Zack Snyder and David Goyer aren't known for doing things in half measures, so they went for the trifecta. There is no way this video will resemble the movie that we got, because there is almost nothing about the movie that we got that actually works. But before we get into 20 minutes of my complaints, a quick reminder of the rules of my fix videos. If I'm working on a sequel, as I am in this video, I am making it a sequel to my fix for the previous movie. That almost won't be an issue here, since so little of this movie builds off of what Man of Steel did, but it's just something to keep in mind as I run through what I would do differently in this film, and with that being said, let's begin. So first, we get rid of Wonder Woman, the footage of the members of the Justice League, the time-traveling Flash, and Bruce Wayne's inexplicable ability to see into the future. The only reason any of this is here is to set up future movies, and none of it actually serves the plot of this movie. This movie comes to a screeching halt to give you a teaser for the Wonder Woman movie or the upcoming Justice League, or even worse, give you a teaser for plot elements that never even materialized, like Superman turning evil after the death of Lois Lane and working with Darkseid to take over the Earth. Don't get me wrong, I don't want an evil Superman working with Darkseid, but if this movie is going to waste valuable screen time on that stuff, then it better be important. And you might say that Superman the Animated Series has an evil Superman working with Darkseid episode, but that's one episode out of 54, whereas this movie is one of 3 that Superman appears in, making the evil ratio significantly higher than what I would want. And I wasn't the only one confused on who this time-traveling guy even was, because he didn't really look like the Flash. And years later, I'm still confused on the why and how of Bruce Wayne being able to see into the future. Was it a vision from Darkseid? At the end of the movie, Lex Luthor apparently knows about Darkseid, so I guess Lex was working for Darkseid the whole time. But why would Darkseid send messages of the future to Bruce Wayne about his own plans? None of this makes any sense, and none of it has anything to do with the plot of this movie, so it's all gone. This movie becomes much more watchable, but still light years away from being okay if you remove these bits from the movie. When you're setting up a shared universe like this, the second movie is way too early to be throwing in vague references to things that you plan on featuring more heavily later on. You might say that the Marvel movies do this kind of thing, but the earliest they ever did anything like this was in the first Avengers movie, when they show Thanos in a post-credits scene. Sure, Thanos doesn't become a growing concern until Avengers Infinity War, 6 years and 13 movies later, but that's different because it wasn't until the 6th movie in that universe that they did some long-term seeding of future plot points, and they actually followed through on what they were setting up. Since I have my doubts that we will ever even see Darkseid period, let alone taking over the Earth with Superman by his side, this movie still feels like an incomplete piece, like someone who starts to tell a joke and then they don't give the punchline. Next, can we get someone else to play Lex Luthor? Jesse Eisenberg doesn't have enough gravitas in this movie. At times, he's playing Luthor as nervous, like when he's giving his speech when Clark and Bruce first meet, or when he enters Zod's ship. And at other times, he seems frantic and jittery, like when he's talking to the Congresswoman or Superman near the end of the movie. All of these are the opposite of what you want for Luthor. I know a lot of people wanted Bryan Cranston in the role, and sure, that would be fine. This isn't a dig on Eisenberg's acting either. I actually really like him a lot in Zombieland, but he is not right for Luthor. This is a big one, but I would make Batman younger. Like, this is his first or second year of being Batman. Maybe you could say that he has already adopted Dick Grayson, and he's been with him for about a year, but you wouldn't see him in this story. In the movie that we got, Alfred mentions that Bruce has been Batman for about 20 years, and I wasn't a fan of that. I guess if you're doing an alternate universe, it would be fine to have an older, more experienced Batman near the end of his career paired up with a young Superman just starting out. And I've heard some people who defend this movie and say that it's just a darker, alternate take on the DC universe, like the Injustice games. But for many people, this is the DC universe. They're not reading the comics or playing the video games or watching the shows. So this is their version of the DC universe. So I know I'm in the minority on this one, since I've heard a lot of people praise Ben Affleck's performance, even if they didn't like this movie as a whole, but I would get someone younger who can do young, somewhat inexperienced Batman. Since you're building a new DC universe, I want to see the beginnings of that universe. I want to see Robin for the first time and Batman's meeting with the Joker. Don't tell me that all of that stuff happened off screen and we're probably never going to see it. That is a huge slap in the face. face. This is also a huge change, but I would make the movie lighter in tone. This movie is so dark, Grave of Fireflies called and said that this film needs to lighten up. In my fix, we won't have a double amputee unknowingly be used as a bomb to blow up the Senate. My fix would not be promoted using pictures that have Superman frowning in the rain. In my fix, this Batman does not brand criminals before they go to prison, resulting in them getting murdered by other criminals. This Batman does not engulf a criminal in a raging inferno, even to save an innocent's life. I mean, if Batman is as good as he says he is, he could find a way to disarm the KG Beast here without killing him and keep Martha Kent safe. This Batman does not spend most of the movie planning to murder Superman because there is a 1% chance that Superman might turn on humanity. Batman killing people in these movies actually bothered me more than Superman killing people, mostly because I'm a bigger Batman fan than a Superman fan, so no disrespect meant to Big Blue. But Batman killing is such a no-no, and it was such a huge part of the Nolan Bale trilogy that ended just 4 years before this movie came out, so I have no idea how you can mess that up as badly as this movie did. But Batman isn't the only one that this movie took a dump on. In my fix, Superman does not choose to allow a CIA agent to get shot in the face when we know that he could save that guy, since he comes to save Lois about 2 seconds after her life is threatened. In my fix, when Lois tells Superman all of the horrible stuff that happened because of him showing up to rescue her, he doesn't say, "I don't care. I don't care what they're saying. The woman I love could have been blown up or shot." I guess maybe someone thought that this was romantic, but Superman saying that he doesn't care what happens to everyone else as long as Lois is okay? Is this the same character from Man of Steel? The one who eventually chose to stand against his fellow Kryptonians and side with the people of Earth? Why does he not care about these people anymore? What could possibly have made him so horrible in just 18 months? Was it working for Perry White? I mean, yes, this version of Perry is a horrible human being who runs a newspaper and somehow doesn't care about news, so yeah, that would certainly change a man, but this much? The other big thing that would alter most of the plot is that I would make this less of a versus movie and more of a team-up movie. I guess you can have these two fight a little bit when they first meet. That's a staple of, I think, literally every superhero team-up in history. But don't build the entire movie around that fight. I want to see these two become friends and work together to fight the bad guys. And I think that's what a lot of other people wanted too. Since these broad alterations pretty much change everything about the movie, let me tell you what I would keep. We still have Lex Luthor, who doesn't like Superman. We can go with the Azzarello Bermejo Lex Luthor Man of Steel graphic novel, where Lex likes the janitor who works in his building because that guy pulled himself up by his bootstraps. But he doesn't like Superman because, as far as he can tell, Superman doesn't have to struggle for what he has. Luthor wants humanity to struggle to become great, but if Superman is there to help them out of every problem that they face, humanity will never attain greatness. This is a pretty simple motivation, but it's much better than all of the nonsense that this movie gave us. I also want to take an idea from Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Mark Millar, and Tom Pyre's Superman 2000 proposal. We see Luthor playing chess with 20 grandmasters simultaneously while reading untranslated Il Principe and teaching himself Urdu via a Walkman he made for himself in 5 minutes back in 1962. Luthor is so smart, we don't even have a word for what he is yet. Calling him a genius is as insulting as calling him an imbecile. Here's another secret. Luthor's LexCorp empire, all the corporate baron stuff that we see him doing routinely, 6 minutes of his day, maybe less. He's not the kingpin. He only pretends to be. Luthor the businessman is the tip of the iceberg, a smokescreen generated to give the public and his enemies a false, easily digested persona which masks his true depths. In other words, Luthor conquered the financial world largely in order to project a secret identity designed to make people underestimate him. LexCorp is but one of 1,000 projects Luthor attends to every day. Now, it would be difficult to convey all of that in one movie, but I would mainly want to show that Luthor isn't just a businessman or a crime lord or a mad scientist, but maybe he does a little of all three over the course of the movie. Now, after the destruction of most of Metropolis during the events of Man of Steel, Luthor bought up most of the real estate and is now literally the owner of a huge chunk of the city. Lois and Clark are the Nick and Nora of the journalism world, tracking down stories, being sexy, the whole deal. They both suspect that Luthor is up to something, but they can't prove it. I'll go ahead and tell you what Luthor is up to now. He wants to secretly reopen the Phantom Zone and find a way to communicate with the Kryptonians and find a way to replicate their technology on Earth. This would be financially great for Luthor, but more importantly for him, he might find a way to be able to kill Superman if he knows a little bit more about where he came from. And I'll go ahead and say this right now, there's not going to be a kryptonite subplot like there was in the movie that we got. It's only in that movie so that Batman and Superman can be on even footing when they fight, but since I'm not making such a big deal about these two fighting in my fix, there's no need for the kryptonite in this version. So to introduce Batman, he comes into Metropolis looking into Intergang. Bruno Mannheim, the head honcho of Intergang, wants to expand his operations into Gotham City, but he has to remove the two major gangsters of Gotham, Sal Maroni and Carmine Falcone, before he can do that. So he wants wants to pit them against each other and start a big gang war. Obviously, lots of innocents are going to get hurt, and Batman needs to put a stop to that. So that's what brings him to Metropolis. Mannheim will be having a meeting with some of the smaller gangsters of Gotham, Tony Zuko, Roman Sionis, maybe Mr. Bertinelli, and he wants to see if they would be willing to swear allegiance to him if he can remove Falcone and Maroni from the board. And maybe you can say that Floyd Lawton is working for one of the Gotham families. By the time this movie came out, the people at Warner Brothers already knew that they would be doing a Suicide Squad movie the following year, so this would be a nice way to save some legwork in introducing characters in that movie. I don't mind setting up stuff for later films, as long as it's not intrusive in this film, and it definitely gets a payoff later on. And I think this would check off both of those boxes. It's here that we will see that Mannheim has a big robot-looking dude as his personal bodyguard. This will be Metallo, created by Lex Luthor and loaned out to Intergang for the right price. There was actual concept art for Metallo for Dawn of Justice, but they never actually used him. I don't like this design, though. It's way too bulky, so I would want it to be more slick, but still obvious that it's a dude with robotic attachments. So let's say the guy who lost his legs actually worked for LexCorp instead of Wayne Enterprises, and Lex built the big huge armor for him before the movie begins. Lex pretends that he's a big humanitarian, even in his more criminal aspects, but he's really only doing this because he knows that this dude blames Superman for the loss of his legs, and he bets that that guy would be more dangerous and pliable in Luthor's hands than someone with more combat training. Instead of this suit being powered by kryptonite, let's just say that it is nuclear or something like that. And if you want to be cutesy about it, Luthor can mention that if they could find a different power source, it would be cheaper, and he could possibly even overpower Superman in a fight. So Batman infiltrates the gang meeting disguised as Matches Malone, but something goes wrong. Maybe there's an undercover cop, perhaps Dan Turpin, who also infiltrated the meeting, and he somehow got discovered. So Batman has to break cover to save Turpin, and here's a twist for you. Batman is still a rookie, so he's not necessarily good at this yet. I wouldn't want to quite go so far as something like the Batman Earth 1 graphic novel, where it seems like he messes up every time he puts on the costume, but I do want to show that he's still young, and he can still get in over his head sometimes, like when he's trapped in a warehouse with a wounded undercover cop, surrounded by gangsters and an 8-foot-tall robot man. After he fumbles the situation a little bit, Batman is able to escape with Turpin. So Clark and Lois will find out about this because instead of Perry White deciding that today Clark will be on sports when the Daily Planet already has a sports guy, Steve Lombard, both Lois and Clark are on the crime beat. Maggie Sawyer will try to keep what went down under wraps, but she knows that Lois will dig into this anyway, so she does tell them that the Bat of Gotham City is rumored to have infiltrated an intergang meeting. Maggie isn't happy that Batman has seemingly taken his fear tactics to Metropolis, and now that her partner is in the hospital, she's going to bring the heat on him. And to show that Batman isn't entirely incompetent, you could show a scene later in the movie where Sawyer leads an attack on Batman, and we can see him escape them without messing up. Now, Superman doesn't exactly approve of Batman's methods, but he can't argue that in the short time that he's been active in Gotham, the crime rates there have gone down considerably. But like Sawyer, he doesn't like that Batman is moving into Metropolis, especially if this is an indication of what will follow him here. Now, while Lois and Clark are at the warehouse, even though Maggie Sawyer is somewhat tight-lipped about what went down, Clark is able to somehow sense that there was a radioactive substance in the building recently. That would be Metallo's energy source. Now, while Batman is doing his thing looking into Intergang and trying to find a way to stop them from moving into Gotham, Bruce Wayne also has a meeting with Lex Luthor. We've seen this before in Superman the Animated Series and in the Lex Luthor Man of Steel graphic novel, where Lex proposes a deal that they can both build weapons together, and maybe Lex can play off the injured Dan Turpin incident and say that if the Metropolis Crime Unit had better weapons at their disposal, then that cop would not be in the hospital right now. But Bruce, very anti-weapons manufacturing, might call out Lex and say he thought this meeting was all about education reform or something like that, so he flat out says no and leaves. But while he's there in one of Luthor's labs, he does recognize some tech that is suspiciously similar to the Metallo suit that he encountered earlier in the movie. Back at the Daily Planet, Lois and Clark give Perry what they've got. Perry says, good, keep running with this, but in the meantime, so-and-so who does Lifestyle is out sick, so Clark, can you go cover for her at this gala thing while Lois keeps going with the warehouse Batman thing? Because, let's face it, Lois is a better journalist. She's been doing this a lot longer, she isn't splitting her time between being a superhero and a day job, so she goes after the bigger story. It's at this gala thing that Clark overhears someone say that billionaire philanthropist Bruce Wayne had a meeting with Lex Luthor earlier today. So Clark is instantly suspicious of this guy, because if he's buddies with Lex, he's probably bad news. And what do you know, Bruce is at the gala, and it's here that Clark will smell the radiation residue from his encounter with Metallo earlier. So Clark already suspects that Bruce and the Batman might be one and the same, but then there's an explosion at Star Labs. So Bruce and Clark quietly excuse themselves from the gala, and they will end up running into each other at Star. Turns out it's Metallo once again, and he's here to steal the engine of one of the Kryptonian ships from the Man of Steel movie. FYI, while Intergang is paying paying for Metallo's services, he's also doing personal jobs for Lex, and that's what's going on here. As soon as Metallo sees Superman, he wants to ditch the mission and just kill Superman slowly. But Luthor's listening in and orders him to focus on getting the engine out of there and don't engage in a needless fight. So naturally, there's a big fight. Both Superman and Batman have trouble holding their own, they may get in each other's way a little bit, and Superman gets knocked down, so we will see that while Superman is crazy powerful, there's more than just kryptonite that can hurt him. And so Batman tries to stop Metallo alone, and he gets injured a little bit so that Metallo can escape. Clark x-rays him to make sure that he doesn't have any internal injuries, and he can now confirm that Batman really is Bruce Wayne. Now, instead of Batman acting all alpha male and menacing like he did when he first meets Superman in the movie, I would want things to be a little more lighthearted here. Oh, you can see through my mask. I didn't know that you could do that. After Clark confirms that Bruce's injuries are minor, the two heroes are at a little bit of an impasse, and they both blame each other for Metallo getting away. Batman will verbalize what Lex Luthor's whole thing is in this movie, about how Superman doesn't have to work with what he's got, he just has it. And Superman will say something like Batman is just as dangerous as some of the criminals that he is going after. This argument goes on for a little bit, and they part ways, but what Clark does not know is that Batman put a tracker on him and on Metallo. Yes, Batman is already pretty sure that Metallo is in league with Luthor, but he still needs to know where he's going, since Metropolis is a big place, and Luthor has many locations that they could be meeting at. So now both Superman and Batman know who each other are. And yes, this is pretty similar to their first meeting in Superman the Animated Series, but that wasn't intentional. But I do like that scene, so I don't mind unintentionally stealing that here. Batman and Superman separately arrive at the idea that whoever was talking to Metallo when they fought him wants both of the Kryptonian engines, which worries Superman because he knows that with both engines someone could reopen the Phantom Zone. They both do some independent investigating and figure out where the other engine is. It's at a military base somewhere outside of Metropolis. Hotshot military guy from the Man of Steel movie will be in command of this base if you like making connections to the Man of Steel movie. As Superman makes his plan to go talk to the general and tell him the engine might be a target, he gets a call from Bruce Wayne. Hey, we need to talk. Oh, by the way, this is Batman. They meet up. Batman tells Superman that he followed Metallo to a building owned by Lex Luthor. Maybe we could even squeeze in a scene at one point where Batman attempted to break into the building, but the security was way too advanced even for someone as gifted at breaking and entering as Batman is. So Batman and Superman decide to put their differences aside and team up to stop Luthor. And they go to the military base to find the other engine is being stolen, but not by Metallo. It's Deadshot, and he switched his allegiances to Intergang, and it's Mannheim who wants the Kryptonian engine. Somehow Mannheim found out that Luthor is after both of the engines, and he wanted to get a hold of this one so that he can then sell it to Luthor for a pretty penny. But before we find all of this out, Metallo shows up to steal the engine. So we'll get Batman fighting Deadshot and Superman fighting Metallo. Deadshot will just barely escape, maybe he steals a military jeep, but this time it's not Batman and Superman getting in each other's way that's to blame. It's Metallo letting his anger get in the way of his mission. Luthor was probably yelling at him in his earpiece to ignore Superman and just go after Deadshot, but this time Metallo doesn't listen. So Batman and Superman are somehow able to disable Metallo so that he's unable to attack them. They leave him in the military's care, and Superman tells Hotshot General Guy that they have reason to believe that Metallo was working for Lex Luthor. This seems absurd to the General Guy, but he still calls it into his superiors, and Batman and Superman go after Deadshot. Deadshot makes it to Mannheim to give him the Kryptonian engine, and let's say that Mannheim had some of his men bring Luthor to him to barter for the engine in person. Superman and Batman will arrive and pretty easily apprehend all of the Intergang members. They think that they've got Luthor right where they want him, but in typical Luthor fashion, he's got all of his bases covered. The authorities have the Kryptonian engine that Deadshot stole, but even when they search Luthor's various properties, they can't find that engine. We'll see in a scene at some point where Mercy was called by Lex and she somehow incinerates the machine to destroy the evidence. While Luthor wanted to get his hands on some Kryptonian technology, it's much more important to him that he does not get caught with his pants down, so he has Mercy destroy the engine. And Metallo is somehow unresponsive after his suit was disabled. Luthor probably activated a failsafe so that Metallo wouldn't talk. So while Superman and Batman stop Metropolis from potentially getting sucked into a wormhole, Luthor still goes free. But he's even more angry than ever at Superman. Remember that scene in John Byrne's Man of Steel comic where Luthor hates Superman because he was arrested and he holds Superman responsible for that? Well, maybe something like that happens here. The police question Luthor and are searching all of his buildings, so even though they didn't arrest him, he still feels humiliated and silently vows to get his revenge. With Intergang's leader going to jail at least for a little while, Batman has successfully stopped the plan to expand into Gotham City, even if it wasn't exactly how he planned to do it. Superman will say that even though he still doesn't agree with Batman's methodology, he can see that Gotham is lucky to have a hero like him. I wish there were more heroes like you, Bruce. Maybe someday there will be. Hints of later members of the Batman family that we might see in future movies. Bruce tells Clark that he's got his work cut out for him, with Mannheim leaving a huge hole in the Metropolis criminal underworld that will likely be filled by someone else, and with Luthor still at large. Batman promises that he will be on call whenever Superman needs him. They shake hands and go their separate ways. Cue credits. Now, like I warned, this is extremely different from the movie that we got. It's not just my personal preferences that made me want to go for a lighter, more upbeat tone for this one. It's that it is completely bonkers that the Batman vs. Superman movie movie that we got is so mired in horrible people doing horrible things for 2.5 hours when the previous movie was supposed to be about hope and optimism. That's just one reason why I didn't want to end this movie with Superman dying like he did in the movie that we got. Also, since General Zod didn't die in my fix for Man of Steel, we would have had to have come up with a completely different origin for Doomsday if we did want to kill Superman off. But since I'm fixing this movie retroactively after we got the Justice League film, I'm perfectly okay not killing Superman here, since most of my problems with the Justice League film came from the parts where they were trying to bring Superman back to life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get more into that a few movies down the road. So I hope that you guys like this video. On my fix videos, I always tend to struggle more when it's something I'm completely doing from scratch, but I was pretty happy with how this one turned out. I hope you guys were too. And if you were, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. The next movie that I will be attempting to fix will be the 2016 film Suicide Squad, so get ready for that one whenever I am able to bring it to you. In the meantime, check out some of the other videos that I do from time to time on this channel, and have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.